Hey everyone, and welcome to my first speed kill with commentary. I'll be talking over the kill while it's happening, and then once it's over, I'll break down some cool things in a lot more detail. This is a record I did with the pose a couple weeks ago, and it's the fastest time currently known to be possible in duo. The timer is only slower than 7-man because of the bring him down in P2, which takes longer with less people clicking. So jumping into things, I'm doing the P1 without a dummy before dropping in to save an invent space. Going off the drop animation, I place a dummy, release my Incend, and Gricko for my 5th Deathspore stack. Deathspore Natty for more crit adrenaline Zerk, and start the phase. It's important to start luring him west early to avoid getting blue bombs. Also, you can optionally keep revolving here for more damage since it clears debuffs. This is the standard P1 lure for normal mode. It allows the person climbing to jump immediately and works regardless of Vorago's walk direction. When Depose finishes his climb, he'll TC the boss into a 12 stack tier 90 spec to end the phase. The climber will always be able to attack on tick with the climb finishing, but for everybody else, they need to have higher pid than the climber, which is 50-50. If you see Vorago's HP go to 0 right before the timer hits 40 seconds, then you've done the P1 correctly. Here we'll do an old trick called crack healing. Since you don't take any damage from healing your teammate right before dropping into the next phase, you can do it for free. Cast a defensive on drop down and use its cooldown timer to know roughly when the boss will appear. This is because it's important for the base to throw a Vuln bomb in the middle or on tick Voke with Vorago appearing to guarantee they get the first bleed. Now this phase is essentially a big time gate since each of us only needs to do about 115k damage, so the rotation isn't that important. Believe it or not, the most important thing in this phase is actually the orbs. We'll spawn one at the start of each reflect in one of 9 locations. For the first orb, it doesn't really matter how soon you click it as long as it happens before the second reflect. The second orb, however, that needs to be clicked as early as possible for a perfect phase 2. So to click the orb as soon as possible, you need to be standing within one tile of it a tick after it spawns. In duo, if both people just spam click on where an orb can spawn, then there's a 2 in 9 chance to get it. It's probably possible to double this with fast reflexes, using the correct camera angles and surging and clicking if it doesn't spawn at the spot you're standing, but we kept it simple. If you try this method, you'll want to have shadows turned on since you can see the shadow of the orb slightly before the orb itself. So here I'm clicking for the orb and Depose is the one who gets it. That starts the bring him down where all we need to do is keep clicking and pray we don't get arthritis. Seriously though, this takes a pretty long time. You only need to click at least once every tick, but spamming helps guarantee it. This would probably be the lamest way to lose a tick on the kill. Now we need to do 50k to clear this part and then finish the phase by 0-ticking his remaining HP. Since he's unattackable right after the bring him down ends, you can spam the first ability to line up the timing easily. Now he's phased and we'll prepare for the P3. It's important not to proc full book in P2 since the phase transition will clear it, but your book will still be on cooldown. Since God books can only proc after being active for at least 26 ticks, it's best to turn it on near the tendrils. Now we decimation spec before drop down and death swift on the first tick of P3. Dive to the middle, drop a dummy and rapid fire same tick. I move 5 tiles away, escape SGB with a run and release, surge, Zebo. I'll do an in-depth breakdown of this phase at the end of the kill since there's a lot of cool things to talk about. We actually managed to get the damage without me proccing my full book, which is both pretty lucky and unlucky. Now we bug abuse for free HPs and move on to phase 4. I don't have alt 1, so Depose tries to call out when the phase starts for an extra storm shard, but it doesn't actually matter if you get this. You can also just roar your first shard coming out of the waterfall instead, since roaring a shard will actually double its damage later when you shatter. Now out of the waterfall, I walk under Vorago to find his walk direction, and then move him to the wall by staying underneath him. Now we're going to skip the clone that would spawn by Depose surging to the opposite wall so that he's far enough away that when the clone mechanic checks for players, it doesn't find any in range other than Vorago's primary target, who never gets a clone. This also causes the 7 autos after the clone to be skipped. Next we have another trick known as a bleed skip, which is what makes Ceilings Week special. Basically, you can skip the 2nd through 5th bleeds by not attacking Vorago and staying outside of melee distance of him. You should put your familiar on passive for this. He'll simply pause doing bleeds for a certain number of ticks before skipping them and continuing his rotation. Since the time that takes is shorter than the bleeds, you get a faster P4. In terms of the amount of time it takes, he'll do his first bleed from any distance, and as long as you don't get a second bleed, it doesn't matter how much he moves overall. Oddly, skipping the first set of bleeds takes 17 ticks, but the second set, it's 18 ticks, even though his rotation repeats the exact same, and his auto attack even happens at the same time out of the waterfall. Adding to this weirdness, in phase 9 of hard mode, the first bleed skip is 21 ticks, and the second is 17. Nothing about the rotation or timings for that phase are any different from this one, except the waterfalls are 4 ticks shorter. This makes me think that maybe Vorago has some other internal timer separate from his auto attack here. I'm not actually sure what explains it since this mechanic is very spaghetti, but the bleed skip timings are consistent across kills. So the final piece of RNG for perfect Vorago is someone getting the fast timer. Basically, depending on your PID relative to the person that mauled Vorago, the kill will end for you either 1 tick after or 2 ticks after the maul is used. For the person mauling, it's always 2 ticks after, so it's just me that can get it, which makes it 50-50. So now I tank the waterfall hit and shatter to guarantee we end the phase with a 1 tick, and now we prepare for phase 5. So in P5 we'll need to push Vorago 8 times, where he can only be pushed 1 tile per tick. Each push will require 20k damage minus any overflow from the last hit on the previous push. Barge bleeds and declaws are great since they hit on multiple ticks. The gaps then need to be filled by using abilities with different hit timings and Gmaul specs. Here I stall a Roared Lang and release with Assault. I overpower into next tick Gmaul and finally Cane. Depose Mauls on tick with the 8th push and I get the fast timer RNG. And the final kill time is 621.6. Okay, now I want to talk about something a bit more technical that applies to phase 5 Vorago and also some other speed kills, and then I'll do a P3 deep dive. So for some speed kills, it can be important to understand the order that the game processes things in a single game tick. In the case of tick perfect melee P5, we need to understand when your character's movement occurs. This is because when Vorago is being pushed every tick, your character will need to continually run back into melee distance of him for your next abilities. Now as it happens, the game puts running as one of the last actions your player does on a tick, whether this be movement from clicking or from attacking a target out of attack range. What this means is that after Vorago is pushed at the start of the tick, when you cast an ability, it's actually getting stalled because your character hasn't moved yet, and near the end of the tick, your character runs 1 tile and releases the stall. So here I'll demonstrate this by casting an ability outside of attack range and then cease right after, and the cease will actually prevent your movement since it doesn't happen right after the ability cast. And just as a sanity check, I'll do it within melee distance to prove that it was only the cancelled movement that stopped the ability. Now the reason this distinction is important that you're actually stalling is because there's several actions that will clear a stall that hasn't been released yet, which will basically just delete the ability from happening. If we look back at the phase 5 rotation, you can see that there was a Gmaul that happened 1 tick after an overpower. If I did these on the same tick, the Gmaul would actually clear the overpowered stall from happening. Similarly, if I sigiled after the Gmaul on the same tick, this would clear the Gmaul. So in general, multiple inputs need to happen on separate ticks to prevent the stalls from getting cleared. There are a couple ways around this though. One of them would be to equip a halberd same tick as casting the abilities to give you an extra tile of attack range. The other option would be to surge before casting your abilities, since movement from surge, escape, and dive do actually happen when you input them rather than at the end of the tick. Alright, I realize this has been a lot of info, but now I'm going to move on to the P3 since that's maybe the most interesting part of this kill. So before I get into the details, I'd like to give credit to OK Joe Schmo for being the first to use Desi SGB of Vorago, I believe. He demonstrated with his solo kills that a lot of techniques that have been used for big damage in Elite Dungeon ranged 1 ticks can be effective here as well. I'd also like to give credit to Sly and Incomprehened for adapting these ideas to Duo and being the first to get a 1 tick P3 before wind arrows got nerfed. Now we made a few improvements on this that allowed the damage to be fairly consistent even after the wind nerf. The main change that we made is we were able to squeeze an extra tick out of the rotation that allowed us to get Dreklich grip off. In addition to this, we were able to optimize the Adren to do a Zebo at the end instead of Snapshot, and we did a Scrimshaw switch also. So in order to fully understand how we were able to fit a rapid fire into the P3, there's a few things I need to explain first about Vorago. At Vorago, there's something called fast drop and slow drop. Basically, every time you complete a phase, one person drops into the next phase a tick sooner than everyone else and gets teleported to a certain tile in the southwest corner of the arena. We guaranteed the depots always had the fast drop by standing on particular tiles at the end of P2. Since the person with fast drop is in the phase 3 arena a tick earlier, this lets them dive and place their DS in the middle. For the person with slow drop, however, it's not possible to dive on the first tick of the phase because your player is not able to dive on the same tick you're teleported to a new area. This means I'm stuck having to place my Swift wherever I land in P3, which for slow drop is a random tile within about 4 tiles of where you were in P2. So next, after the rapid, we need to stall the SGB and release it one tick later so that the arrow hits will line up with the Zebo after it. In most situations, you'd have 3 options for releasing a stall. The first is a spell like Smoke Cloud. If you want to release it in the middle of your GCD, however, then you'd need ability queuing turned on. Additionally, you need your auto attack to be off cooldown, which is a separate cooldown from the global cooldown. Since every hit of a channeled ability will reset your auto cooldown and the last hit of rapid fire is cast only 2 ticks before we need to release, that means this is not an option. So the other 2 options are either a click release by simply clicking the target you stalled on, or a run and release where you enter attack range from your character running close to the target after casting the ability from too far away. And the method I opted for the final kill was a run and release using escape. Escape is a bit particular because the distance you move back is based on the attack range of the weapon you're holding. If you're holding a bulg, then you escape 8 tiles. Now after we escape and cast an ability, your character will start running 2 tiles every tick, where the first 2 tiles happen on the same tick you cast the ability. So if we want the SGB to release on the next tick, then we'll end up running 4 tiles. And the final piece of the equation is that bulg has an attack range of 9 tiles, so that's at least how close we need to be after we escape the 8 tiles and then run back in 4. So if we do some quick movement maths or just brute force test, we find that the magic number is either 4 or 5 tiles away from the dummy before we escape. Hopefully that didn't seem too oddly specific, and you can use this general approach to time a run and release anywhere in the game. The only limitation to a run and release that doesn't apply to a spell release is that you can't cast another ability on the same tick, so it's best for releasing slow hitting abilities. Now there is one last piece to this puzzle because after we SGB, we need to be in melee distance of Vorago for our Zebo spec to hit 1 tick after casting instead of 2. We could do this either with a bladed dive or with a surge, with the surge being the easier one to execute. This means we need to be 5 tiles away and angled at the dummy at a particular diagonal so that when we surge, we end up in melee distance on the other side of Vorago. If you end up underneath Vorago when he spawns, then your Zebo hits will get nulled. Now you might be wondering about the fact that I surged out of my Death Swift right before I casted my ability and whether this means its damage didn't get boosted. So again, it's important to understand the order that the game processes things, and in the case of Death Swift and Sunshine, the game only checks if you're inside of them near the beginning of the tick and then boosts all abilities in that tick even if you leave it with Surge. I think Hellwear Pleb, Night Eyes, and Pup might have been the first to use this in their 1 tick trio of Heraclith. So that about wraps it up. There's a lot of interesting things we use that I didn't discuss, like how scrimshaw switching works or placing dummies next to each other without them getting blocked, but this video is getting pretty long. Probably in a future speed I'll have another opportunity to explain these things, so make sure to subscribe if you want to learn more about how speed kills work. If anything was confusing, feel free to ask in the comments. See ya!